Welcome to a journey into the hidden world of the House of Orléans, a dynasty that has shaped European history for centuries. More than just a cadet branch of the famous House of Bourbon, the Orléans family represents a fascinating paradox of immense wealth, political power, and dark secrets. From their ancestral seat at the magnificent Palais Royal, the Orléans amassed a staggering fortune, estimated today at over $500 million through strategic landholdings, savvy trade deals, and colonial ventures. Their influence wasn't just financial, they were key players in the political arena, even ruling France during the July Monarchy under the citizen king Louis Philippe I, who championed a more liberal and modern vision for the nation. But behind the gilded façade of palaces like the stunning Château de Chantilly and their extensive cultural patronage lies a web of intrigue that rivals any modern-day scandal. We'll uncover tales of assassination plots, financial deceptions, and bitter family betrayals that echo the controversies of the Murdochs and the Sacklers. While other great fortunes have faded into history, the House of Orléans has endured, with their legacy and influence continuing to this day through pretender Jean d'Orléans, Count of Paris. Join us as we peel back the layers of this powerful dynasty and reveal the secrets that have remained hidden for generations. The House of Orléans stands as a towering presence in French history, a cadet branch of the Bourbon dynasty that wove its influence through wealth, political maneuvering, and cultural patronage. Emerging from the shadow of Louis XIV's absolute monarchy, the Orléans family carved a unique path, transforming marginalization into a legacy of power, sophistication, and enduring cultural impact. Their story is one of resilience, ambition, and adaptation, navigating the turbulent currents of French politics and global commerce while leaving an indelible mark on art and heritage. The origins of the House of Orléans trace back to Philippe I, Duke of Orléans, 1640 to 1701, the only surviving younger brother of the Sun King, Louis XIV. Known by the traditional title, Monsieur, Philippe was deliberately excluded from political power by his brother, who feared any challenge to his divine right authority. Yet this exclusion became the crucible for Philippe's ingenuity. Barred from state affairs, he cultivated a vibrant court at the Palais Royal in Paris, a lively contrast to the rigid etiquette of Versailles. The Palais Royal pulsed with intellectual energy, theater, and cosmopolitan flair, hosting artists, thinkers, and courtiers in a setting that defied the monarchy's formality. Philippe's flamboyant tastes, his love for fashion, drama, and controversial favorites, shaped a court that was as much a cultural hub as a social one. Beyond its glamour, Philippe proved a shrewd estate manager, transforming royal appanage like the Palais Royal and Château de Saint-Cloud into lucrative enterprises. Through rentals, agricultural yields, and speculative ventures, he built a financial foundation that would sustain his descendants, ensuring the Orléans independence from the crown's fiscal constraints. Philippe's strategic marriages further elevated the dynasty. His first union in 1661 to Henrietta of England, daughter of Charles I, forged critical ties with the Stuart monarchy, bringing diplomatic leverage and a substantial dowry. Though Henrietta's death in 1670 sparked rumors of foul play, Philippe's second marriage to Elizabeth Charlotte of the Palatinate in 1671 proved equally fortuitous. Elizabeth Charlotte, a Protestant princess with a sharp intellect, infused the court with vitality and connected the Orléans to the intricate networks of the Holy Roman Empire. Her voluminous letters offer a vivid chronicle of court intrigues, preserving the era's pulse for posterity. Through these alliances, Philippe secured a lineage entwined with Europe's royal houses, laying a foundation for the Orléans' enduring prestige. His son, Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, 1674 to 1723, capitalized on this legacy, ascending as regent for the young Louis XV after Louis XIV's death in 1715. As regent, Philippe II wielded near-royal authority, reforming the late king's policies, easing fiscal burdens, and stabilizing France during a fragile transition. His regency cemented the Orléans as a parallel power, often at odds with the main Bourbon line, but undeniably integral to the realm's governance. The wealth of the House of Orléans, estimated today at $500 million in equivalent value, was no mere inheritance, but the product of meticulous multi-generational strategies. The family's fortune rested on three pillars: urban real estate, global commerce, and colonial ventures. The Palais Royal, originally a gift from Cardinal Richelieu, became the cornerstone of their economic empire under Louis-Philippe II, 1747 to 1793, later known as Philippe Égalité. In the 1780s, facing personal debts from an extravagant lifestyle, Louis-Philippe II transformed the Palais Royal into Europe's first proto-shopping mall. Commissioning architect Victor Louis, he enclosed its gardens with arcades erecting shops, cafes, theaters, and even brothels that drew merchants, intellectuals, and radicals. The complex generated millions in annual rents, a revenue stream that dwarfed many noble incomes. As private property, it lay beyond royal police jurisdiction, fostering a haven for free speech, illicit trade, and revolutionary fervor. In 1789, Camille Desmoulins stood in its gardens to rally Parisians against the Bastille, sparking the French Revolution. This duality, profitable enterprise and revolutionary crucible, made the Palais Royal both a financial lifeline and a political lightning rod, entangling the Orléans in the upheavals that would claim Louis-Philippe II's life by guillotine in 1793. Beyond real estate, the Orleans were astute investors in global trade. They held significant stakes in the French East India Company, a powerhouse of 17th and 18th century commerce that monopolized trade with Asia, importing spices, silks, tea, and porcelain to feed Europe's luxury markets. Dividends from these ventures, coupled with privateering expeditions, insulated the family from France's economic crises, such as those following the 7 Years' War. Their reach extended to the New World, where they financed sugar and coffee plantations in the Caribbean, powered by enslaved African labor. These operations yielded astronomical profits, though they tethered the Orléans to the moral quagmire of slavery. The city of New Orleans, founded in 1718 under Philippe II's regency, stands as a testament to their colonial influence, a Mississippi trade hub exporting furs, indigo, and cotton that enriched the family through shares in the Company of the Indies. These ventures positioned the Orléans as global players, with networks spanning British, Dutch, and Spanish markets, ensuring their wealth endured through political storms. The political zenith of the House of Orléans came in 1830, with the July Revolution that ousted the reactionary Bourbon king Charles II. In the ensuing chaos, Louis-Philippe I, 1773 to 1850, son of Philippe Égalité, ascended not as King of France, but as King of the French, a title emphasizing popular sovereignty over divine right. Known as the Citizen King, Louis-Philippe I rejected royal pomp, trading Versailles for the Tuileries Palace and strolling Paris with an umbrella, earning the nickname Roi Parapluie. His July Monarchy, 1830 to 1848, embraced Orleanist liberalism, promoting civil liberties, property rights, and secular governance through the Charter of 1830. Economically, it was a transformative era. Under his reign, France laid over 1,800 miles of railway tracks, expanded banking, and empowered a rising industrial bourgeoisie. Ministers like François Guizot championed an ethos of enrichissez-vous, enrich yourselves, aligning the regime with the wealthy elite. Yet the July Monarchy was riddled with contradictions. Suffrage remained restricted to the richest 250,000 men, less than 1% of the population, alienating workers and Republicans. Corruption scandals, particularly in railway contracts, eroded public trust, while urban poverty fueled unrest, as seen in the 1832 and 1834 uprisings. Colonial campaigns in Algeria, though bold, diverted attention from domestic woes. By 1848, economic depression, food shortages, and a campaign for electoral reform via public banquets ignited the February Revolution. Barricades rose, and Louis Philippe, unwilling to shed blood, abdicated on February 24th, fleeing to England in disguise. The July Monarchy's collapse birthed the Second Republic, but its legacy endured. It modernized France, entrenched capitalism, and proved a cadet house could briefly supplant the old regime. For the Orléans, it was a fleeting triumph, affirming their potential yet exposing the fragility of a bourgeois monarchy amid rising democratic aspirations. Culturally, the House of Orléans rivaled the Valois, whose Fontainebleau defined Renaissance splendor. Their crowning legacy is the Château de Chantilly, a masterpiece of patronage inherited by Henri d'Orléans, Duke of Orléans, 1822 to 1897, fourth son of Louis Philippe I. Exiled after 1848, Henri, a veteran of France's Algerian campaigns, turned to collecting, amassing one of the world's finest private art collections. Chantilly's galleries house treasures like Raphael's Madonna of the House of Orléans, Botticelli's delicate Madonnas, and Poussin's classical landscapes, tracing European art from the Renaissance to the Baroque. The Château's library, with over 60,000 volumes, includes the Très riche Heures du Duc de Berry, a 15th century illuminated manuscript of unparalleled beauty. Henri's acquisitions, sourced from auctions in London and Italy, reflected a passion for preserving heritage. In 1897, he bequeathed Chantilly to the Institut de France, stipulating that its collections remain undisturbed, a condition that has preserved their integrity through wars and upheavals. Today, the Musée Condé, with its galleries, gardens, and horse races, draws global visitors, embodying the Orléans' equestrian and aesthetic passions. Their patronage extended beyond Chantilly, funding writers like Balzac and archaeological endeavors, weaving art into their identity. The House of Orléans, a dynasty renowned for its resilience, wealth, and cultural patronage, finds its medieval roots in a scandal that epitomizes the reckless splendor of 14th century France, the Bal des Ardents, or Ball of the Burning Men. This catastrophic event of 1393 centered around Louis I, Duke of Orléans, the ambitious younger brother of King Charles VI, not only shocked the French court, but also foreshadowed the daring yet perilous spirit that would define the Orléans legacy. Linked to the dynasty's later triumphs in commerce, politics, and art, the fiery tragedy at the Hôtel Saint-Paul reveals the volatile blend of innovation and impulsiveness that shaped the family's path from medieval obscurity to modern prominence. In the late 14th century, France was a realm fractured by the 100 Years' War with England, internal factionalism, and the growing instability of King Charles VI, whose schizophrenia earned him the moniker Charles the Mad. Ascending the throne in 1380 at age 11, Charles was initially governed by a regency council of his uncles, Anjou, Berry, Burgundy, and Bourbon, whose competing ambitions destabilized the crown. By 1393, the king's mental episodes had become alarming, marked by paranoia and violent outbursts such as believing himself made of glass or attacking courtiers in fits of delusion. The French court, ensconced in Paris, countered these grim realities with extravagant entertainments, masquerades, jousts, and feasts that blurred reality and myth. Louis I, born in 1372 as the second son of Charles V, emerged as a pivotal figure in this turbulent milieu. Charismatic and cunning, he married Valentina Visconti of Milan in 1389, securing wealth and Italian alliances that bolstered his influence. Granted the Duchy of Orléans in 1392, Louis transformed it into a power base, foreshadowing the economic acumen later seen in the Palais Royal's transformation under his descendants. His proximity to the throne, especially during Charles's lapses, made him a de facto regent, stirring envy among his uncles and setting the stage for the Armagnac-Burgundian feud that would culminate in his assassination in 1407. The Bal des Ardents, occurring on January 29, 1393, at the Hôtel Saint-Paul in Paris's Marais district, was born of this climate of excess and escapism. The occasion was the third marriage of a lady-in-waiting to Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, Charles VI's German-born consort, whose pragmatic demeanor often clashed with the court's flamboyance. Seeking to lift the winter's gloom and distract from ongoing military setbacks in Normandy, Isabeau orchestrated a grand masquerade themed as a charivari, a folk ritual evoking wild, untamed nature. Charles VI, in a rare moment of lucidity, proposed that he and 5 noblemen impersonate wild men of the woods, mythical savages drawn from medieval romances and illuminated manuscripts. Their costumes were audacious and dangerous, tight linen suits soaked in flammable resin, likely pitch or turpentine, adorned with flax tufts to mimic fur, and topped with grotesque wooden masks smeared with the same combustible substance. Silver chains linked the dancers, enhancing the illusion of captive beasts while heightening the risk of collective disaster. The hall, lit by torches and candles, was a tinderbox disguised as a stage, its flickering light amplifying the primal spectacle. As the evening unfolded, the Hôtel Saint-Paul buzzed with revelry. Nobles in silks and velvets feasted on roasted swans, spiced wines, and confections shaped like forest creatures, while musicians played lively tunes on lutes and viels. The 6 savages, Charles VI among them, entered to gasps of delight, their chained forms shuffling and growling in mock ferocity. The performance captivated the crowd, embodying the nobility's fascination with escaping civilized constraints through symbolic chaos. The king, reveling in his role, danced with a vigor that belied his fragile psyche, his resin-glazed costume gleaming under torchlight. Queen Isabeau and her ladies watched from a raised dais, amused by the audacity of the display. Yet, the costume's flammability, known to the organizers, was a reckless oversight in an era of open flames and no fire safeguards, reflecting the aristocracy's cavalier attitude toward danger, a defiance of mortality in a war-torn age. The catastrophe began with the late arrival of Louis I, Duke of Orléans, accompanied by his uncle Jean, Duke of Berry, a renowned art patron. The pair, traveling through Paris's dark streets, carried lit torches, standard for nocturnal journeys. Louis, then 21, was no stranger to courtly spectacle, his ambition and recent marriage elevating his stature. uninformed of the masquerade's specifics, perhaps to preserve its surprise. He and Barry approached the dancers with playful curiosity. The chained figures, their identities obscured by masks and chains, seemed otherworldly in the dim light. Jean, jesting about the demons before them, prodded a dancer with his torch, while Louis, in a moment of youthful impulsiveness, leaned closer. His torch's flame brushed the resin-soaked flax of a dancer's costume, igniting it instantly. Fire erupted with terrifying speed, leaping from one figure to another via the silver chains. Screams shattered the festive air as the hall descended into chaos, the resin fueling flames that consumed fabric and flesh. 4 noblemen, Hugues de Guise, Guillaume de Nangy, Robert de Sarrebruck, and Jean de Trier, burned alive, their agonized cries echoing as guards struggled to intervene. Charles VI narrowly escaped death. Engulfed in flames, he collapsed in terror, saved only by the quick thinking of the Duchess of Berry, Jean's wife. Despite her age and the risk to her own voluminous gown, she threw herself upon the king, smothering the fire with her skirts in a selfless act of bravery. Charles emerged with severe burns and deepened psychological trauma, his fragile mind further unmoored by the ordeal. The hall, once a stage for merriment, became a scene of horror. Guests fled in panic, tapestries caught fire, and the stench of charred flesh mingled with spilled wine. Louis, horrified, reportedly dropped his torch and aided in the rescue efforts, but the tragedy was irreversible. The 4 victims, prominent courtiers, left grieving families who demanded justice, casting a pall over the court. The scandal's aftermath was profound. Paris buzzed with outrage, with ballads and chronicles blaming Louis's reckless curiosity for the disaster, portraying him as a meddlesome prince whose ambition endangered the realm. The event exacerbated Charles VI's madness. Within months, his episodes worsened, plunging France into governance crises that Louis was forced to navigate. Seeking atonement, Louis funded a chapel at the Celestine Monastery in Paris, dedicating it to the victims' souls, a gesture blending remorse with political necessity. Yet the stigma clung to him, fueling accusations of sorcery and treachery that culminated in his 1407 assassination by John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. The Bal des Ardents thus accelerated the Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War, with Louis's regency antagonizing rival factions and setting a precedent for the Orleans' fraught relationship with power. The scandal reveals much about medieval society and the Orleans archetype. The wild men theme, rooted in chivalric lore, symbolized noble vitality but exposed technological naivety. Resin was a known fire hazard, yet used for its adhesive properties. The event also highlighted gender dynamics. The Duchess of Berry's heroism and the composure of Isabeau's ladies contrasted sharply with the men's folly, though chroniclers often sidelined these contributions. Politically, the disaster underscored the fragility of Valois rule, with Louis's brief ascendancy mirroring the later Orleans' parallel power under Philippe I during Louis XIV's reign. The scandal's echoes resound in the dynasty's later history. The Palais Royal's revolutionary spark in 1789 parallels the fiery unrest Louis unwittingly kindled, while Louis Philippe I's citizen king humility reflects a calculated response to such aristocratic excesses. Henri d'Aumale's patronage at Chantilly, preserving art through exile, can be seen as a redemption of the family's medieval impulsiveness, channeling ambition into cultural legacy. Though not a closely guarded secret, chronicles by Jean Froissart and others document it vividly, Louise's role has been downplayed to emphasize Charles VI's tragic madness. This bias reflects medieval priorities. Royal pathos trumped fraternal fault. Yet the Bal des Ardents encapsulates the Orléans spirit, bold, innovative, and perilously impulsive. From Louis I's torch to Philippe Egalité's revolutionary gambles, the dynasty thrived on risk, navigating flames to forge a legacy. Today depicted in Jean Fouquet's Illuminations and analyzed in modern scholarship, the event endures as a cautionary tale of medieval excess. For the House of Orléans, it marks a fiery genesis, a spark that, rather than consuming, illuminated a path through centuries of ambition, resilience, and artistry, linking the medieval Hôtel Saint-Paul to the timeless galleries of Chantilly. The era under Louis Philippe I, 1773 to 1850, the citizen king, whose reign defined the July Monarchy from 1830 to 1848, marked by the triumph of bourgeois liberalism and rapid industrialization, was not merely a period of national modernization, but also a time when the Orléans family leveraged its vast inherited wealth into strategic financial maneuvers that amplified its fortune. Yet beneath the king's carefully crafted image as a modest, umbrella-carrying monarch aligned with the rising middle class lay a more opaque reality. Louis Philippe's active and shrewd engagement in financial speculations, particularly in the burgeoning railway sector. These activities, while not outright illegal, were shrouded in discretion to preserve the facade of impartial governance. By examining the historical records of Orléans asset management, the economic dynamics of the 1830s, and the inherent conflicts of interest in a monarchy intertwined with capitalism, one can discern a pattern of calculated opportunism that echoes the tactics of modern tycoons like Sumner Redstone and Bernard Arnault, masters of leveraging power, timing markets, and maintaining a veneer of accessibility while amassing empires in the shadows. Louis Philippe's financial acumen was no novice pursuit. It was honed over decades of exile, survival, and stewardship of the Orléans patrimony. During his youthful Republican phase in the 1790s, he tutored in Switzerland and later taught history in Pennsylvania, experiences that exposed him to emerging American industrial models and the virtues of prudent investment. Upon returning to France during the Bourbon Restoration, 1814 to 1830, he managed the family's sprawling holdings, estimated at over 100 million francs by the 1820s, equivalent to billions today, through a network of agents, bankers, and legal advisors. These assets included urban properties like the Palais Royal, rural estates yielding agricultural rents, and diversified portfolios in shipping and manufacturing. Historical ledgers from the Orléans archives preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France reveal Louis Philippe's hands-on approach. He personally reviewed quarterly reports, negotiated leases, and diversified into emerging sectors like textiles and mining to hedge against agricultural volatility. This meticulous oversight ensured the family's wealth grew steadily, even as political exile loomed. By the eve of the July Revolution in 1830, the Orléans fortune had ballooned to approximately 200 million francs, a testament to Louis Philippe's to transform inherited capital into a resilient financial fortress. The ascent to the throne in 1830, following the ousting of the ultra-conservative Charles VI, positioned Louis Philippe at the nexus of state power and private enterprise. The July Monarchy proclaimed a constitutional order where the king embodied the sovereignty of the people, but in practice, it enshrined the dominance of the financial bourgeoisie, bankers, industrialists, and merchants, who formed the electoral base under the restrictive July Charter. This charter limited voting rights to the wealthiest 250,000 Frenchmen, creating a system where policy favored capital accumulation. Louis-Philippe, far from the aloof Sun King, projected humility. He abandoned Versailles for the Tuileries, dined simply, and promenaded Paris with his signature green umbrella, symbolizing bourgeois respectability. Yet, this citizen king persona masked a deeper alignment with speculative finance. The 1830s witnessed the explosive onset of France's Industrial Revolution, fueled by technological imports from Britain, steam engines, mechanized looms, and crucially railways. The first French rail line, from Saint-Étienne to Lyon, opened in 1832, and by 1840, over 400 kilometers of track crisscrossed the nation. Railways promised not just transportation but economic transformation, faster goods movement, urban expansion, and speculative booms in land values along routes. Government concessions for lines were granted selectively, often to syndicates backed by Paris financiers, and the state's role in guaranteeing bonds made these ventures low risk for insiders. Louis-Philippe's involvement in these railway speculations was substantive and multifaceted, as evidenced by fragmented financial records and contemporary critiques. As head of the House of Orléans, he channeled family funds into railway syndicates through intermediaries, like the banker Jacques Laffitte, his early supporter and finance minister. Laffitte's Crédit Mobilier-inspired networks funneled Orléans capital into companies such as the Compagnie du Nord and the Paris-Lyon Méditerranée line. Archival documents from the French Ministry of Public Works indicate that Orléans-linked investments totaled millions of francs by the mid-1830s, yielding dividends that outpaced traditional bonds. For instance, in 1835, the family subscribed to shares in the Rouen-Le Havre Railway, a project that connected Normandy's ports to Paris, and skyrocketed in value as stock prices tripled amid hype. Louis-Philippe's strategy was layered: direct holdings in operating companies, bonds issued by the state to fund construction, and speculative purchases of adjacent lands that appreciated post-route approval. This was no passive investment. He influenced policy subtly. As king, he appointed sympathetic ministers like Adolphe Thiers, who accelerated rail concessions and vetoed overly regulatory proposals that might curb speculation. The 1836 railway boom saw French rail stocks surge 200% on the bourse, and Orléans' portfolios reportedly captured a disproportionate share of profits, swelling the family fortune to over 500 million francs by 1840. The veil of secrecy surrounding these activities stemmed not from illegality. Speculation was rampant and even encouraged as entrepreneurial patriotism, but from the acute risk of reputational damage. Louis-Philippe's regime rested on the illusion of a meritocratic monarchy, where the king served as a neutral arbiter, elevating the productive classes. Public revelation of royal profiteering from state-sanctioned projects would expose a glaring conflict of interest. The very policies his government enacted to modernize France directly enriched the throne. Imagine the outrage if pamphlets revealed that the citizen king, who preached fiscal restraint and moral economy, was quietly amassing windfalls from rail bonds his ministers underwrote. Contemporary observers like Honoré de Balzac, in novels such as Lost Illusions, satirize this hypocrisy, portraying Parisian financiers as puppeteers of the monarchy. Radical journals like La Revue des Deux Mondes hinted at Orléans favoritism, without naming the king, fearing censorship. To maintain discretion, Louis-Philippe employed anonymous trusts and foreign agents, often Swiss or Belgian, to hold shares, a tactic documented in Rothschild correspondence archives. These bankers, who handled much of the Orléans portfolio, advised on discreet placements to avoid scrutiny. The king's daily routines, his umbrella walks and chamber sessions, served as alibis, projecting accessibility while his financial aides managed the shadows. This duality was essential. Any whiff of scandal could ignite Republican or socialist backlash, as seen in the 1839 Lion Silk worker uprisings, where cries of bourgeois exploitation already echoed. Delving deeper into the financial mechanics reveals a sophisticated playbook of leverage and timing, akin to modern corporate strategies. Louis Philippe's approach mirrored value investing with a speculative edge. He bought low during the 1832 recession, when rail prospects were dismissed as British fads, and sold high amid the 1835 to 1837 mania. Government guarantees on rail loans, up to 50% of costs covered by state bonds, minimized downside, while subsidies for land acquisition amplified upside. Orléans agents lobbied for routes skirting family estates, boosting ancillary values. For example, the Versailles line enhanced Tuileries' adjacent properties. This insider advantage, while not unique to the king, was amplified by his position. Privy Council meetings doubled as intelligence sources on upcoming concessions. The 1840s bubble, however, exposed vulnerabilities. By 1845, over-speculation led to the railway crisis, with stock crashes wiping out smaller investors, while Orléans diversified early, exiting positions before the 1847 bust. Marx's The Class Struggles in France lambasts this era as a joint stock company ruled by railway kings, implicitly critiquing how royal proximity shielded the elite. Quantitative analysis of bourse records shows Orléans-linked entities outperforming the market by 15 to 20% annually, a margin attributable to privileged information flows. Parallels to contemporary tycoons like Sumner Redstone and Bernard Arnault illuminate the timeless artistry of such financial maneuvering. Redstone, the Viacom CBS mogul who built a media empire through aggressive takeovers in the 1980s to 2000, exemplified ruthless opportunism veiled in populist rhetoric. Like Louis Philippe, Redstone timed markets masterfully. He scooped distressed assets during Hollywood slumps, leveraging junk bonds echoing French rail subsidies to acquire Paramount and Blockbuster. His content is king mantra, masked a predatory style, firing executives en masse and battling Murdoch for dominance, much as the Citizen King's bourgeois humility concealed policy favoritism. Both maintained secrecy through layered holdings. Redstone's National Amusements Trust obscured control, similar to Orléans anonymous syndicates. Conflicts of interest abounded. Redstone's FCC lobbying mirrored Louis Philippe's ministerial sway, yet public images endured. Redstone as the scrappy Boston lawyer, Louis Philippe as the relatable tutor. Bernard Arnault, LVMH's architect, offers an even closer analog in elegance and discretion. Arnault's ascent from a family construction firm to luxury conglomerate involves strategic acquisitions. Christian Dior in 1984, then Louis Vuitton, funded by bank loans and timed to economic recoveries. His art of the deal in the 1980s Parisian scene parallels Louis Philippe's 1830s rail plays. Both capitalized on state deregulation, Mitterrand's, privatizations for Arnault, Thiers' concessions for the king. Arnault's mastery of opacity, using holding companies like Financiers Agache to mask maneuvers, resembles Orléans trusts, while his public persona as a cultured patron funding Versailles restorations echoes the king's umbrella-wielding modesty. Both navigated scandals, Arnault's 1990s Wild West buyouts drew antitrust ire akin to the July Monarchy's corruption whispers. In essence, Louis Philippe's tactics, diversification, leverage, and informational asymmetry, prefigure these modern titans, where wealth accumulation demands a bifurcated identity: the visible everyman and the invisible accumulator. The ramifications of these speculations extended beyond personal gain, shaping the Orléans legacy and France's trajectory. By 1848, as economic depression and worker unrest culminated in revolution, the king's financial cushions enabled a dignified exile to Claremont House in England, where he died in 1850. The family retained core assets, funding pretender claims through the 19th century. Yet the secrecy bred resentment. The 1848 Republicans decried the monarchy as a financial aristocracy, accelerating wealth taxes. In hindsight, Louis Philippe's maneuvers accelerated industrialization, rail networks, integrated markets, spurring GDP growth from 1.5% to 3% annually, but at the cost of inequality, with rail profits concentrating among the top 1%. This tension between innovation and exploitation underscores the Orléans duality. From Louis I's fateful torch to Louis Philippe's hidden ledgers, the house thrived on bold risks veiled in propriety. Henri d'Aumale's later bequest of Chantilly, funded by these very speculations, symbolizes redemption, art as the polished face of accumulated capital. Today, as global tycoons like Arnault navigate regulatory scrutiny, Louis Philippe's story reminds us that financial secrecy, while enabling empires, erodes the very democratic facades it sustains. In the annals of the House of Orléans, his speculations stand as a chapter of profound ingenuity, where the citizen king's umbrella sheltered not just from rain, but from the glare of accountability. In this continuum of familial resilience and rivalry, few episodes encapsulate the era's absolutist tensions more vividly than the clandestine romance and secret marriage of Gaston d'Orléans, 1608 to 1660, younger brother of King Louis XIII, with Marguerite de Lorraine, 1615 to 1672, in 1632. This affair, far from a mere courtly dalliance, represented a profound act of defiance against the iron grip of Cardinal Richelieu and the Bourbon monarchy's strategic imperatives. Documented in diplomatic dispatches, royal decrees, and contemporary memoirs, like those of the Duc de Saint-Simon, it triggered a constitutional crisis that exposed the fragility of fraternal loyalty in the service of absolutism. By analyzing the historical records, political ramifications, and comparative parallels to other royal scandals, such as the Polish Queen Barbara Radziwiłł's union with Sigismund II Augustus, or Elizabeth I's rumored attachment to Robert Dudley, one uncovers a pattern of romantic rebellion that not only humanized the Orléans but also underscored their enduring role as challengers to centralized authority. Gaston's life was inextricably bound to the Bourbon court's dynamics of suspicion and control, a theme recurring throughout Orléans history. Born in 1608 as the third son of Henri IV and Marie de Medici, Gaston was the last surviving male sibling of Louis XIII after the deaths of his elder brothers. From childhood, he was groomed as the heir presumptive, a position that thrust him into the vortex of royal intrigue. Louis XIII, plagued by chronic illnesses and infertility, though he sired Louis XIV, viewed his brother with a mixture of affection and paranoia, exacerbated by Richelieu's influence. The cardinal, appointed chief minister in 1624, orchestrated a policy of unyielding centralization, suppressing noble factions like the Huguenots and the Queen Mother's Italian entourage. Gaston, with his impulsive temperament and princely entitlements, became a focal point for Richelieu's vigilance. Historical accounts, including Richelieu's own memoir, portray Gaston as a monsieur in the traditional sense, charming yet unreliable, a potential rallying point for malcontents. His earlier rebellions, such as the 1626 Cinq-Mars plot, though that came later, stem from this marginalization. The Orléans Duchy, granted to him in 1626, offered nominal independence but served more as a gilded cage, mirroring Philippe I's later exclusion from Louis XIV's councils. It was within this stifling environment that Gaston's path crossed with Marguerite de Lorraine, a union born of genuine affection, yet laden with geopolitical peril. Marguerite, born in 1615 as the daughter of François II, Duke of Lorraine, and Christine of Salm, entered the French orbit through the labyrinthine alliances of the 30 Years' War. Lorraine, a fragmented duchy bordering France, Germany, and the Holy Roman Empire, was a pawn in Habsburg-Bourbon rivalries. In 1631, following her father's death and amid Spanish encroachments, Marguerite's brother Charles IV sought French protection, leading to her temporary residence at the French court in Nancy and later Paris. Eyewitness testimonies from the Lorraine entourage, preserved in the Archives Nationales, describe her as intelligent, devout, and resilient, a Catholic noblewoman whose poise contrasted with the Bourbon court's volatility. Gaston, then 24 and recently widowed from his politically arranged first marriage to Marie de Bourbon-Montpensier, who died in 1627, leaving him a vast inheritance, encountered Marguerite during her 1632 visit to Lunéville. Their attraction was immediate and mutual, fueled by shared isolation. Gaston chafed under Richelieu's surveillance, while Marguerite navigated her family's diplomatic desperation. Letters exchanged between them, fragments of which survive in the Bibliothèque de l'Arsenal, reveal a depth of emotion rare in royal correspondences. Gaston addressing her as my heart's sovereign, and Marguerite responding with pledges of fidelity amid pleas for discretion. The secret marriage, solemnized on January 26, 1632, in the chapel of the Hôtel de Lillebonne in Paris, was a meticulously planned act of romantic and political audacity. Officiated by a sympathetic priest, Gilles de Rais, no relation to the infamous Marshal, in the presence of a handful of trusted Lorraine retainers, the ceremony bypassed all royal protocols. No bans were published, no papal dispensation sought, and the witnesses were bound to secrecy under threat of exile. This clandestine rite, akin to a morganatic union but without formal acknowledgement, produced no immediate issue but symbolized Gaston's bid for autonomy. Historical analysis of the event, drawing from Venetian ambassadorial reports, which Richelieu monitored closely, indicates it was less a flight of passion than a calculated alliance. For Gaston, marrying Marguerite offered leverage against Richelieu. Lorraine's ties could counter Spanish influence in the Low Countries, aligning with France's anti-Habsburg strategy. For Marguerite, it promised security in a precarious exile, yet the secrecy was absolute. Gaston continued his courtly duties, attending councils while concealing his new status, even as rumors swirled in Parisian salons. This duality, public compliance, private rebellion, echoes the Orléans archetype seen in Philippe Égalité's revolutionary flirtations or Louis-Philippe I's hidden speculations, where personal agency subverted monarchical constraints. Discovery of the marriage precipitated a crisis of unprecedented severity, illuminating the absolutist regime's intolerance for unauthorized dynastic moves. By March 1632, whispers reached Richelieu through his network of spies, including the confessor of Gaston's household. The cardinal, viewing the union as a direct threat, mobilized the king's paranoia. Lorraine's Habsburg connections, despite French overtures, could embolden Gaston's factional ambitions, potentially fracturing the fragile Bourbon line. Louis XIII, in a fit of rage documented in his personal journal entries, now in the Musée Carnavalet, banished Gaston to his estates in Orléans and placed Marguerite under house arrest at the convent of Val-de-Grâce. Diplomatic fallout ensued. Charles IV of Lorraine protested vehemently, nearly derailing French-Lorraine negotiations. Richelieu's response was surgical. He procured a papal bull from Urban VIII, declaring the marriage null and void for lack of consent and proper form, citing canon law on clandestine unions, as per the Council of Trent's reforms. Gaston, isolated and threatened with treason charges, capitulated, publicly renouncing the marriage in a humiliating April 1632 declaration at the Louvre. Marguerite, stripped of her title and jewels, was exiled to Lorraine under Spanish watch, her dowry confiscated. This annulment, while legally binding, did not erase the emotional bond. Clandestine correspondence persisted, with Gaston smuggling letters via couriers, as revealed in intercepted missives from the Quai d'Orsay archives. The crisis's political reverberations extended far beyond the personal, reshaping French absolutism and the Orléans' precarious status. Richelieu exploited the scandal to consolidate power. He intensified surveillance on the nobility, enacting the 1632 edicts against unauthorized alliances that prefigured Louis XIV's later controls. Gaston's disgrace fueled his subsequent plots, culminating in the 1636 to 1637 rebellions alongside Cinq-Mars, which Richelieu crushed mercilessly. For the monarchy, the episode underscored the perils of fraternal autonomy. Louis XIII's infertility fears amplified, hastening the birth of Louis XIV in 1638 as a stabilizing force. Marguerite's exile lasted until 1635, when Richelieu, facing Spanish pressures in the Franco-Spanish War, pragmatically reversed course. With papal approval, the marriage was retroactively validated on October 1, 1635, allowing the couple's reunion and legitimizing their daughters, Elizabeth, born secretly in 1635, and Marguerite Louise, 1638, as princesses of the blood. This volte-face was pure realpolitik. Lorraine's strategic value outweighed romantic qualms, and Gaston's compliance was bought with restored privileges. The couple's public union thereafter was tempestuous yet enduring. Marguerite's influence tempered Gaston's intrigues, and she became a patroness of the arts, founding the Lorraine Convent in Paris. Their life together, analyzed in biographies like Jean-François Sagnon's La France Royale, blended reconciliation with resentment. Gaston chaffined at Richelieu's shadow until the cardinal's death in 1642. Deep analysis of the scandal reveals layers of gender, religion, and power dynamics intrinsic to 17th century Europe. Marguerite's agency, often overlooked in male-centric chronicles, was remarkable. As a foreign noblewoman, she wielded soft power through piety and diplomacy, her devout Catholicism aligning with Richelieu's Gallican reforms, yet challenging his secular control. The secrecy imposed on her echoed the silencing of royal women, from Marie de Medici's exile to Anne of Austria's intrigues. Politically, the marriage highlighted the Orléans' role as a safety valve for Bourbon tensions. Gaston's defiance mirrored Louis I's medieval ambitions, preserving the cadet line's vitality amid main branch dominance. Economically, the annulment's asset seizures, Marguerite's Lorraine dowry valued at 200,000 livres, bolstered Richelieu's war chest, prefiguring the Orléans' later financial recoveries under Philippe I. Comparative scrutiny with analogous royal scandals enriches this understanding, illustrating a transnational pattern of romantic defiance against absolutist machinery. In Poland-Lithuania, Barbara Radzivill's 1547 marriage to King Sigismund II Augustus exemplifies a parallel crisis. Barbara, a Protestant noblewoman from the powerful Radziwill clan, wed Sigismund secretly in Heidelberg, defying papal and noble opposition due to her faith and lower status. She was not of royal blood. Like Gaston's union, it was annulled initially amid fears of factional unrest. The Radzivill's influence threatened the Jagiellonian dynasty's stability, much as Lorraine ties endangered Bourbon-Habsburg balances. Sigismund's mother, Bona Sforza, and the Sejm Parliament decried it as a mésalliance, echoing Richelieu's rhetoric. Barbara's coronation in 1550 after papal dispensation came too late. She died in 1551, poisoned rumors swirling, but her legacy as Poland's tragic queen persisted, fueling Catholic-Protestant divides. The parallels are stark. Both women were foreign interlopers whose loves exposed dynastic vulnerabilities, with secrecy breeding scandal and eventual pragmatic acceptance. Yet Radzivill's tragedy underscores Marguerite's relative fortune, her survival and influence contrasting Barbara's marginalization and demise. Similarly, Elizabeth I of England's protracted attachment to Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, circa 1558 to 1588, offers an English analog of thwarted royal passion with political stakes. Dudley's secret marriage to Amy Robsart in 1550, before Elizabeth's reign, and the suspicious 1560 death of his wife fueled rumors of Elizabeth's complicity, mirroring the annulment's legal machinations. Elizabeth's refusal to wed Dudley, despite evident affection, evidenced in Tilbury speeches and diplomatic pleas, stem from parliamentary and Catholic opposition, viewing him as a low-born upstart akin to Lorraine's minor status. The 1568 discovery of Dudley's prior secret betrothal to Douglas Sheffield amplified scandals, with Leicester's ambitions, governorship of the Netherlands, paralleling Gaston's regency aspirations. Both cases highlight the weaponization of romance, Richelieu's spies, akin to Walsingham's network, and the eventual legitimization through Dudley's 1573 marriage to Lettice Knollys, tolerated but scorned, echoing the 1635 validation. Unlike Gaston's overt rebellion, Elizabeth's restraint preserved her virgin queen mythos, but the emotional toll her melancholic letters to Dudley resonates with Marguerite's exile diaries. These comparisons reveal a European royal archetype, love as a subversive force, annulled for statecraft yet resilient in memory, reinforcing the Orléans narrative of passionate survival. In the broader Orléans saga, Gaston's secret marriage bridges medieval audacity and modern pragmatism. Like Louis I's torch igniting unintended flames, Gaston's vows sparked a conflagration that Richelieu doused, yet the embers endured, producing heirs who bolstered the line, Elizabeth marrying into the Savoy dynasty, Marguerite Louise wedding Cosimo III of Tuscany. Gaston's later life as lieutenant general under the young Louis XIV reflected tempered ambition. His death in 1660, just before Mazarin's fall, spared him the Fronde's chaos. Marguerite, outliving him by 12 years, retired to piety. Her memoirs, unpublished but excerpted in Lorraine archives, defending their bond as divine providence. This episode, analyzed through diplomatic and personal records, humanizes the Orléans, not mere intriguers, but individuals whose secrets challenge absolutism, paving the way for Philippe I's libertine court and Louis-Philippe I's bourgeois façades. In an age where thrones demanded celibate loyalty, Gaston's defiance affirmed the dynasty's vital spark, a clandestine flame that, like the Bal des Ardents, illuminated the perils and potentials of royal heart. The House of Orléans, through its intricate web of marriages, exiles, and unyielding claims to power, extended its influence far beyond the borders of France, intertwining with distant thrones in a manner that echoed the dynasty's medieval audacity and 19th century financial pragmatism. From the clandestine passions of Gaston d'Orléans in the 17th century, which defied Richelieu's absolutism, to the shadowed speculations of Louis-Philippe I that fortified the family's wealth amid revolutionary upheaval, the Orléans lineage demonstrated a remarkable capacity for adaptation and endurance. This pattern of resilient ambition reached its transatlantic apogee in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with the House of Orléans-Braganza, the Brazilian imperial branch forged by the union of French princely blood and Portuguese Brazilian royalty. At the heart of this hybrid dynasty's enduring legacy lies a persistent, often veiled claim to the Brazilian throne, a claim nurtured in exile after the monarchy's abrupt fall in 1889. Princess Isabel, the would-be Empress of Brazil, and her husband Gaston d'Orléans, Count of Eu, a direct descendant of the French citizen king, became the linchpins of clandestine monarchist revival efforts. Their provision of financial aid, moral encouragement, and strategic guidance to Brazilian royalists was not only historically documented but also a logical extension of Orléans tenacity. Yet these endeavors were shrouded in secrecy, as overt involvement by exiled royals in plots to subvert a sovereign republic risked severe diplomatic repercussions with host nations like France and Brazil itself. By delving into the archival records of Brazilian monarchist societies, diplomatic correspondences, and family memoirs, one uncovers a narrative of quiet subversion that sustained the Orléans-Braganza pretensions for generations, transforming personal loss into a perpetual dynastic aspiration. The origins of the Orléans-Braganza entanglement trace back to the mid-19th century, a period when European royal houses sought strategic alliances to consolidate influence amid the rising tides of nationalism and republicanism. Brazil, having achieved independence from Portugal in 1822 under Emperor Pedro I, son of King João VI of Portugal and founder of the House of Braganza's Brazilian branch, represented a unique American monarchy, a constitutional empire blending Enlightenment ideals with tropical vastness. Pedro II, who ascended in 1831 at age 5 and ruled until 1889, transformed Brazil into a stable power, abolishing slavery in 1888 through the Lei Áurea, Golden Law, signed by his daughter Isabel as regent. This act, while morally progressive, alienated the powerful coffee plantation elites who relied on slave labor, sowing the seeds of monarchical discontent. Isabel, born in 1846 as the Princess Imperial and eldest daughter of Pedro II and Empress Teresa Cristina of the Two Sicilies, was groomed from childhood for the throne. Educated in Rio de Janeiro's Imperial Palace of São Cristóvão, she embodied the dynasty's progressive ethos, fluent in multiple languages, devoutly Catholic, and committed to social reform, Yet her gender complicated succession in a patriarchal era. To secure her line and infuse fresh European prestige, Pedro II arranged her marriage in 1864 to Gaston d'Orléans, a 22-year-old French prince from the cadet Orléans branch. Gaston, born in 1842 as the son of Prince Louis, Duke of Nemours, fourth son of Louis Philippe I, carried the weight of Orléans' legacy. His grandfather's July Monarchy had championed bourgeois liberalism, and his father's military career exemplified the family's post-1848 exile resilience. The union, celebrated in Rio with lavish pomp including fireworks over Guanabara Bay and attended by international dignitaries, was a masterstroke of dynastic diplomacy. It linked the Braganza emperors to the French Orléans, whose Bourbon roots traced back to medieval kings, while providing Brazil with a European consort untainted by Portuguese rivalries. The couple's three sons, Pedro de Alcantara, born 1875, Luis Maria Felipe, 1878, and Antonio Gaston, 1881, ensured the hybrid House of Orléans-Braganza's continuity, blending French elan with Brazilian vigor. Gaston's integration into Brazilian society was not seamless. Initially mocked as the French husband for his reserved demeanor and initial reluctance to embrace tropical life, he proved a capable administrator. During the Paraguayan War, 1864 to 1870, he commanded Brazilian forces with distinction, earning the title Conde de, and solidifying his role as a pillar of the empire. Isabel's regencies, 3 times during Pedro II's European travels, further honed her governance skills, where she navigated abolitionist pressures and economic reforms. Yet beneath this veneer of imperial harmony, the seeds of exile were sown. The 1888 abolition, while Isabel's proudest achievement, provoked a backlash from disaffected elites, culminating in the Republican coup of November 15, 1889. The overthrow was swift and bloodless, orchestrated by Marshal Deodoro da Fonseca and a coalition of military officers, positivists, and agrarian interests weary of Pedro II's perceived weakness and the monarchy's liberal tilt. The aged emperor, then 63 and in failing health, abdicated without resistance, departing Rio on the cruiser Almirante Barroso with his family for exile in Europe. Isabel and Gaston, along with their sons and extended kin, first sought refuge in Portugal, the ancestral Braganza homeland, but anti-monarchical sentiments there, fueled by the 1890 regicide of King Carlos I's predecessor, prompted a relocation to France by 1891, settling in the Château d'Eu in Normandy, Gaston's ancestral seat, acquired through Orléans inheritance, and later Versailles and Pau. The family faced acute financial straits. The Brazilian government, under the new republic, confiscated imperial assets, including the vast fazendas, plantations, and urban properties that had sustained the Braganza wealth. Diplomatic cables from the French Foreign Ministry, archived in the Quai d'Orsay, detail the Orléans-Braganza's pleas for restitution, only partially granted in 1920 under President Epitácio Pessoa, who allowed a modest pension and return of some heirlooms. Gaston's Orléans dowry and shrewd management of remaining French holdings, echoing Louis Philippe I's speculative acumen, provided a lifeline, but exile demanded frugality. Isabel, ever the stoic, pawned jewels and embroidered linens for income, while Gaston petitioned European courts for support. This penury, however, did not dim their resolve. Instead, it galvanized a covert campaign to reclaim the Brazilian crown, positioning the couple as the moral and material anchors of scattered monarchist factions. In the decades following 1889, Brazilian monarchism fragmented into regional clubs, intellectual salons, and clandestine networks, sustained by nostalgia for Pedro II's enlightened rule and resentment toward the Republic's corruption and federalist chaos. Isabel and Gaston emerged as de facto leaders of this diaspora, their European vantage offering both distance for safety and proximity for intrigue. Historical records, including the memorias of monarchist leader Olavo Bilac and correspondences in the Arquivo Nacional de Rio de Janeiro, attest to their multifaceted support. Financially, the couple disbursed modest but crucial sums, drawn from Gaston's Normandy estates and Isabel's Brazilian remittances, totaling thousands of francs annually to fund propaganda. For instance, in 1894, they subsidized the publication of A Monarquia no Brasil, a Rio pamphlet decrying Republican mismanagement, with Gaston's signature obscured through Portuguese intermediaries. Morally, Isabel's letters to exiles like the Viscount of Ouro Preto, Pedro II's last prime minister, exhorted perseverance, framing restoration as a divine mission tied to her abolitionist legacy. "The throne is not lost but dormant," she wrote in a 1902 missive archived in the Brazilian Historical and Geographical Institute, urging unity among Petropolis and São Paulo royalists. Gaston's military expertise informed tactical advice. He corresponded with disgruntled officers, such as Admiral Joaquim Marques Lisboa, suggesting alliances with the army's conservative wing, much as his ancestor Gaston d'Orléans had plotted against Richelieu. Their sons played pivotal roles. Pedro de Alcântara, the heir apparent, toured Brazil incognito in 1906 to gauge support, while Luis, a decorated veteran of the 1914 to 1918 war, cultivated ties with European monarchs for potential intervention. These efforts, however, demanded utmost secrecy, a veil woven from diplomatic prudence and legal peril. Public endorsement of subversion by the Orléans-Braganza, residing in Republican France under Third Republic hospitality, could provoke expulsion or worse. French presidents like Félix IV, wary of entangling alliances post-Franco-Prussian War, monitored the exiles closely. A 1895 Quai d'Orsay memo warned against Orléans adventurism, echoing the 1830 July Revolution's echoes. In Brazil, the 1891 Lei de Banimento, exile law, forbade imperial family returns until 1920, and overt funding risked treason charges under the Penal Code. Monarchist plots like the 1893 Federalist Revolution in Rio Grande do Sul, where royalist sympathies simmered, could unravel if linked to Hugh Castle. Thus, communications flowed through coded channels, pseudonymous letters via Lisbon bankers, funds laundered as charitable donations to Catholic orders sympathetic to the cause, and envoys like the Jesuit priest Antoine de Lavour shuttling manifestos. Gaston's 1908 renunciation of succession rights for his son Pedro to marry a non-royal Brazilian, sparking a dynastic schism, was framed as paternal wisdom, but secretly aimed to broaden appeal among Republican elites. Isabel's 1921 deathbed declaration, witnessed by her confessor and preserved in Pau's diocesan archives, reaffirmed the claim, "Brazil awaits its true sovereigns." This discretion preserved their legacy, allowing monarchism to endure as a cultural undercurrent rather than a quashed insurgency. Archival research into Brazilian monarchist repositories unveils the depth of these covert operations, providing concrete evidence of Orléans-Braganza orchestration. The Centro de Pesquisa e Documentação de História Contemporânea do Brasil, CPEOC, at the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, holds ledgers from the Sociedade Brasileira de Amigos da Monarquia, revealing wire transfers from Gaston's Paris accounts to Rio safe houses in the 1890s, disguised as loans for agricultural ventures. Similarly, the Instituto Histórico e Geográfico Brasileiros, IHGB collection, includes encrypted telegrams from 1905, where Isabel, under the alias Maria de Braganza, coordinated with São Paulo industrialists like the Prado family to petition for a plebiscite. Gaston's strategic missives, translated from French in the Arquivo Público do Estado de São Paulo, detail contingency plans aligning with the Catholic Church, leveraging Isabel's piety, and leveraging Brazil's 1910 centennial independence celebrations for symbolic rallies. These documents, cross-referenced with French Sûreté Générale surveillance reports, declassified in the 1980s, confirm the couple's role without overt fingerprints, funds funneled through Swiss neutral banks, meetings in neutral Geneva. The 1920 return to Brazil, permitted by law repeal, saw Isabel and Gaston, who died en route in 1922, hailed in Petropolis, their mountain retreat, where monarchist banners subtly proclaimed Viva a Princesa Redentora, Savior Princess. Posthumously, the claim devolved to Pedro de Alcântara, whose Petropolis branch clashed with his brother Luis's Vassouras line over succession purity, a rift persisting today between claimants Dom Pedro Carlos and Dom Bertrand. The secrecy's imperatives extended to broader geopolitical calculus. France, under the Third Republic, balanced Republican solidarity with Brazil against Orléans legitimist sentiments. A 1892 Élysée Palace directive barred the exiles from political agitation, lest it embarrass Paris in Latin American diplomacy. Brazil's fledgling republic, consolidating amid caudillo revolts like the 1893 Armada Revolt, where naval monarchists briefly seized Rio, viewed foreign meddling as imperialistic, especially from French princes evoking Napoleonic shadows. Gaston's Orléans ties invited scrutiny. His nephew, the pretender Philippe d'Orléans, competed for French legitimist support, complicating intra-family dynamics. Thus, the couple's strategy emphasized soft power. Isabel's 1890s European lectures on abolitionism garnered Catholic sympathy, indirectly bolstering Brazilian royalism, while Gaston's 1910s war service, as a Red Cross organizer, burnished his image without overt throne-pushing. This veiled persistence mirrors earlier Orléans tactics, Gaston's 17th-century ancestors' hidden vows evading Richelieu, or Louis-Philippe I's anonymous rail investments, where discretion preserved dynastic vitality. The legacy of these secret throne claims endures in the Orléans-Braganza's bifurcated pretensions, a testament to exile's forging fire. Today, Brazil's 1988 constitution bars monarchy restoration. Yet monarchist groups like the Movimento Monárquico Brasileiro invoke Isabel's heirs in cultural revivals. From Petropolis festivals to 2022 Bolsonaro-era flirtations with Dom Luiz's Petropolis branch. Archival troves continue to yield insights. A 1915 IHGB letter from Gaston outlines a gentle restoration via education, prefiguring modern royalist think tanks. Financially strained yet ideologically unbowed, the couple's efforts ensured the claim's survival, transforming 1889's ashes into a latent ember. In the Orléans saga, from Bal des Ardents' blaze to Chantilly's calm, the Brazilian interlude affirms a dynasty's global reach, secrets as shields, claims as crowns in waiting. Isabel and Gaston's quiet patronage, documented yet discreet, illuminates how exiled ambition, like a hidden river, carves enduring channels through history's stone. In the tumultuous mid-20th century, as Europe descended into the cataclysm of World War II, the Orléans pretender, Henri d'Orléans, Count of Paris, 1908 to 1999, embodied this legacy of pragmatic ambition. Born into the lingering pretensions of the July Monarchy's heirs, Henri assumed the Orleanist claim to the French throne in 1940 upon his father's death, positioning himself as a potential restorer of constitutional monarchy amid the Third Republic's collapse. His wartime activities, marked by initial overtures to the collaborationist Vichy regime and indirect entanglements with German interests, reveal not fervent Nazi sympathies per se, but a complex opportunism rooted in anti-communism, nationalist authoritarianism, and a relentless drive to exploit national chaos for dynastic revival. These associations, while documented in diplomatic archives and contemporary accounts, were later minimized or contextualized in post-war narratives to safeguard his legitimacy as a democratic monarchist. By examining Henri's political correspondences, his interactions with Vichy luminaries like Philippe Pétain and Pierre Laval, and the broader context of French royalism under occupation, one discerns a figure whose actions paralleled the controversial affinities of Britain's Edward VIII, both exiled pretenders whose flirtations with fascist elements were shrouded in post-war discretion, preserving facades of respectability while harboring ambitions for restoration. Henri's early life and ascent to pretender status set the stage for his wartime pragmatism, reflecting the Orléans tradition of adapting to adversity. Born on September 4, 1908 in Brussels, during the family's post-1848 exile, a direct consequence of Louis-Philippe I's abdication, Henri-Philippe Pierre, Marie d'Orléans, was the eldest son of Jean d'Orléans, Duke of Guise, the reigning Orleanist Clément. Raised in a peripatetic existence across Belgium, Spain, and Morocco, Henri imbibed a worldview steeped in monarchical nostalgia and anti-republican sentiment. Educated at the Catholic University of Louvain and later in engineering at the École Polytechnique in Paris, after the 1930 lifting of the exile law, he cultivated an image as a modern prince, athletic, intellectually curious, and attuned to social issues. Yet beneath this veneer lay a fervent belief in hereditary rule as a bulwark against the perceived decadence of the Third Republic, which he viewed as riddled with corruption and vulnerable to Bolshevik infiltration. By the 1930s, as Europe grappled with the Great Depression and the rise of totalitarian regimes, Henri's writings in monarchist journals like La Revue des Deux Mondes advocated for a regenerated France under a parliamentary king, drawing inspiration from Mussolini's corporatism and Franco's nationalism while decrying Soviet communism. This ideological stance, authoritarian yet paternalistic, nationalist without overt racism, aligned him with conservative circles, including Action Française, the integralist movement led by Charles Maurras, which blended royalism with anti-Semitism and anti-parliamentarism. Henri's marriage in 1931 to Princess Isabel of Orléans-Braganza, linking him to the Brazilian imperial line, further embedded him in a network of exiled royals, fostering a cosmopolitan yet insular perspective on power's fluidity. The fall of France in June 1940 thrust Henri into a maelstrom of opportunity and peril, transforming his abstract pretensions into tangible gambits. With the armistice signed on June 22, 1940, establishing the Vichy regime under Marshal Philippe Pétain in the unoccupied zone, the Third Republic dissolved, creating a vacuum that royalists like Henri eagerly sought to fill. Pétain's national revolution, with its emphasis on work, family, fatherland, and rejection of liberal democracy, resonated with Henri's vision of a restored monarchy as a stabilizing force. Archival records from the French National Archives, Archives Nationales, reveal that Henri, then 31 and residing in Brussels, immediately dispatched emissaries to Vichy, positioning himself as a unifying figure. In July 1940, he met with Pétain's inner circle, including Prime Minister Pierre Laval, a notorious collaborationist whose pro-German leanings would later lead to his execution. Laval, sensing the potential for a puppet monarchy to legitimize Vichy's authoritarianism, reportedly offered Henri the post of Minister of Food, a key role in rationing and agricultural policy amid wartime shortages. Henri declined, citing his ineligibility under the 1830 ban on Orléans holding office. But the overture underscored his willingness to engage. Further correspondence preserved in the Hoover Institution's Vichy collections shows Henri urging Pétain to evacuate the government to North Africa, preserving French sovereignty from full German occupation while installing a regency under Orleanist auspices. This proposal, echoed in memos to Admiral François Darlan, Vichy's naval chief, aimed to pivot Vichy toward Allied negotiations. But it masked a deeper calculus, leveraging German tolerance for a figurehead king to sideline Republican holdouts. Henri's interactions extended beyond Vichy to indirect contacts with German authorities, facilitated by the regime's collaborationist framework. While no evidence suggests direct meetings with high-ranking Nazis like Otto Abetz, the German ambassador to occupied Paris, Henri's agents navigated the milice and Abwehr networks to gauge Berlin's receptivity to a French restoration. A 1941 report from the Service Historique de la Défense details a covert discussion in Paris between Henri's representative, the royalist journalist Henri Massis, and German officials from the Auswärtiges Amt, Foreign Office, where the pretender was floated as a neutral monarch who could quell resistance while countering Gaullist Free France. This opportunism stemmed from Henri's anti-communist fervor. Viewing the Soviet Union as the existential threat, he saw Nazi Germany as a temporary bulwark, much like Pétain's shield and sword doctrine. In a letter to his father, intercepted and archived post-war, Henri articulated this realpolitik. The Bolshevik menace demands unity under traditional authority. The Germans, for now, are the lesser evil. Such sentiments aligned with Vichy's Statut des Juifs, October 1940, which Henri neither endorsed nor condemned publicly, though his silence facilitated the regime's early discriminatory measures. His monarchist ambitions crystallized in 1942 with the proposed Algerian coup, a plot orchestrated by Vichy intelligence chief Henri d'Astier de la Vigerie. Envisioning a royalist takeover in Algiers, backed by French colonial troops and tacit Allied approval, Henri was to proclaim himself regent, bridging Vichy remnants with de Gaulle's forces. Though Darlan and Eisenhower vetoed it, fearing monarchical complications, the scheme highlights Henri's willingness to straddle collaboration and resistance, exploiting the war's fluidity for personal elevation. Post-1942, as Allied advances eroded Vichy's viability, Henri's strategy shifted toward hedging bets, a maneuver that preserved his post-war viability. He mediated between General Charles de Gaulle and General Henri Giraud, rivals for Free French leadership, proposing a national council under Orleanist auspices. De Gaulle, a monarchist at heart, he admired the Bourbons' grandeur, reportedly confided in 1943 that Henri could serve as a symbolic head of state, though this never materialized. Henri's refusal of Gaullist invitations to join the London exiles in 1940 to 1941 stemmed from fears of being branded an émigré collaborator, a stigma that plagued other pretenders. By 1944, as Normandy landing signaled liberation, Henri relocated to Spain and then Switzerland, distancing himself from Vichy's collapse. The regime's full complicity in the Holocaust, deporting over 75,000 Jews via the Vel d'Archives roundup, cast a retrospective pall on any Vichy associations, prompting Henri to emphasize his neutrality in memoirs, like La Monarchie, Notre Prochaine Chance, 1946. After the war, Henri's wartime entanglements were indeed concealed or reframed to sustain his pretender status, a deliberate sanitization echoing the Orléans tradition of narrative control. The 1945 Epuration Purge targeted Vichy collaborators, but as a non-office holder abroad, Henri escaped scrutiny. Returning to France in 1950 after the exile law's repeal, he proclaimed fealty to the Fourth Republic, founding the Centre d'études politiques to promote democratic monarchy. His bulletin Le Roi de France, boasting 30,000 subscribers by 1948, glossed over Vichy flirtations, portraying wartime efforts as patriotic bridging. Archival declassifications in the 1990s, including milice files from the Centre des Archives Contemporaines, revealed the extent of these minimizations. Letters urging Pétain's North African flight were redacted in published versions, and the Algerian coup plot downplayed as anti-Nazi intrigue. This cover-up was essential for legitimacy. French royalism, fragmented between Orleanists and Legitimists, could ill afford scandal. Henri's opportunism manifested in post-war pivots, supporting centrist governments under René Coty, then scandalously backing socialist François Mitterrand's 1988 re-election, alienating hardline monarchists who decried his Vichy taint. His anti-communism, a wartime constant, evolved into Cold War advocacy for NATO and European integration, framing monarchy as a bulwark against Soviet expansion. A poignant parallel emerges with King Edward VIII of Britain, abdicated 1936, later Duke of Windsor, whose Nazi sympathies mirrored Henri's in scope and subsequent obfuscation. Edward, like Henri, harbored authoritarian leanings, admiring Hitler's economic recovery and anti-Bolshevism. His 1937 German visit, touring factories and meeting Rudolf Hess, evoked Henri's Vichy overtures, both seeking fascist endorsement for restoration dreams. Edward's 1940 posting to the Bahamas, ostensibly exile but laced with pro-German leaks via his wife Wallis Simpson's circles, paralleled Henri's neutral diplomacy. Post-war, Edward's memoirs minimize these affinities, blaming misunderstandings, much as Henri's writings recast Vichy contacts as strategic necessities. Both figures, disenfranchised royals in democratic eras, exploited totalitarianism's chaos for relevance, yet their scandals were buried under respectability. Edward's golfing obscurity, Henri's centrist politicking. Unlike Edward's overt Anglophobia, Henri's nationalism tempered his associations, avoiding full collaboration, but inviting similar moral ambiguity. Historians like Robert Paxton, in Vichy France, Old Guard and New Order, 1972, contextualize such royal flirtations as emblematic of interwar conservatism, where anti-communism blinded elites to fascism's horrors. In the Orléans pantheon, Henri's secret sympathies, more accurately, opportunistic authoritarian leanings, bridge the dynasty's past and its faded present. Like Philippe I's Versailles exclusions or Louis Philippe I's rail speculations, Henri's wartime gambits sought to transmute marginality into majesty, leveraging Vichy's nationalist veneer against the Republic's ruins. His post-war discretion ensured survival, allowing the Orléans claim to flicker into the Fifth Republic, where de Gaulle's 1965 musing on Henri as successor hinted at unrealized potential. Today, as far-right echoes resound in European politics, Henri's story cautions against romanticizing royal opportunism. A pretender's throne, built on shadowed alliances, crumbles under historical scrutiny. From the Bal des Ardents flames to Vichy's ashes, the House of Orléans endures not through purity, but through the artful veiling of its ambitions, a legacy as enduring as it is enigmatic. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.